We're going to cover today a very interesting situation that gets ready to happen every summer and fall, and that's going to college. Across the nation, parents and students are getting ready to go to college that entails a whole lot of things. So it's a great time in a young person's life, but it's also a very dangerous time in a young person's life, especially for the female students. We got Tracie here with us today, and we're going to talk about the red zone and some of the hidden dangers that you can expect going to college. Tracie, how are you?
Good morning.
So when we look at something along this lines, it's a very exciting time for people. It's a very positive step in their journey as they get ready to take flight out of the nest. But it's also a very insidious, dangerous time. Let's talk about why we call it the red zone and why it's dangerous for girls.
Right. Well, the month of August all the way up until Thanksgiving is called the red zone because that's when over 50% of sexual assaults happen on college campuses. They say about 90% of that is alcohol related, but what I thought was pretty staggering was the statistics that show that almost 1 in 4 undergraduate females report, no, it's not report, they're statistically are victims to sexual assault between the ages of 18 and 24. And believe it or not, they say that about 1 in 16 males on college campuses. And I think this is, well, I know for a fact it's because that's when all the partying's going on. They're rushing fraternities, sororities, the tailgate parties at football games. Did you know that fraternities are they have 3 times more likely to be perpetrators of sexual assaults? And 74% of sororities are more likely to be sexually assaulted than just your regular college student. So it's just that time where freshmen are settling in, they're away from their mom and dad, they want to fit in, they get an invite to a party. Probably they've never drank before, if any, or just little. And so going off to college and going to a party and having drinks handed to them constantly is a huge contributing factor, to this problem.
Oh yeah, because you and I never drank in college.
No.
Yeah. But this brings up a great point because what's interesting is just the sheer age of being 18 years old and being thrown in the mix with 20 to 24-year-old men, um, with the pressure that that entails. And also, as you'd mentioned, from a fraternity standpoint, we have some statistics that show that some surveys show that college-aged men, a huge percentage, would rape a female if they thought they could get away with it.
Right.
So we're
Right.
really dealing with an immature brain for most of the males that you're going to be dealing with on campus at that age group. And what's interesting is in some colleges, they're as large as as a town. When you go, this community can have 50,000 students. So you're basically talking about 25,000 men between the ages of 18 and 24 years old.
Mhm.
And for a whole group of incoming freshmen, that can be staggering in terms of the predatory behavior that males are showing during that time. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about some of the things that parents worry about and how we can start talking about the things that we can help our students do to stay safe.
Yeah, that's a great question because I think, before kids go off to college, parents are, make sure you're responsible about your money. Make sure, you set your alarm when you go to class. Don't forget to study. Don't party too hard. And we're throwing all of these don'ts at our students when really what we need to be talking about is this subject, because this is what we hear the most when it comes to campus crime. And there's a movie that I want to recommend that parents and their kids watch together. It's called The Hunting Ground. It actually was nominated for an Oscar. I think you can get it on Netflix. It's about an hour documentary about the college rape culture. It also shows, who the perpetrators are most likely. And unfortunately, it's fraternities and athletes. But it also talks about how campuses will try to hide these statistics because they have to post this on their websites when parents are shopping for colleges with their kids. So it's really important to know, it's like any safety drill. You're going to be fine if you go into your college experience knowing the dangers that could possibly be there. And it's all about prevention. I mean, you and I both know self-defense, 90% of it is awareness. So just having our students aware of what could potentially happen.
Well, and I think that I have personal experience where you're talking about statistics, and that is a real touchy subject. And I think we have to accept that the prevalence of sexual assaults is way higher than being reported. And that's from two ends in my experience. One, as you mentioned, campuses have to report that. And there is a very uh, contentious line between what is the campus and what
Right.
is not. And
Mhm.
so I've seen cases that were reported as a rape on campus, and then they turned out not to be because they were across the street from the line of the where the campus is. And most often, the biggest contention comes from sexual assaults that happen on off-campus housing. And even though they may be near the school, they're not part of the school. So those statistics don't show up.
Right.
The other thing that we run into is that from statistics that in municipalities, a lot of times they don't prosecute for rape or sexual assault. It generally gets pled down to something like aggravated assault. And so
Right.
the rape aspect is taken out of it. So we what's the old saying? There's lies, there's damn lies, then there's statistics. So we
Yeah.
have to accept for the fact that the prevalence and the potential for danger is more than we think from looking at the numbers. So I
Yeah.
really wanted to jump in on that because that really is a hard thing for parents to get used to, is your kids may be oh gosh, and I know I was for the campus that I went to, it was extremely dangerous. And I had a lot of interesting, I had a lot of fights. I had a lot
Yeah.
of self-defense things because it was a big city. And
Right.
the campus is part of the big city, but right off campus, you are not immune to all the forces at play there. So
Right.
I interrupted you in some aspects of, let's talk about the things to prepare for, the things to talk to, not this whole bunch of don'ts.
Yeah. Well, before we even get there, I was just going to say, let's talk about consent as well and the consent laws. But I read a staggering statistic. By the way, my statistics all come from RAINN, RAINN. It's the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. They estimate only about 5 out of 1,000 perpetrators are actually convicted. And it's because a lot of it is only about 20% of the time will the victim report it? And I just kind of wanted to go over real quickly why students don't want to report it. And this comes from the DOJ. Did you know that they found that there's about 6 reasons for not reporting? And this just breaks my heart. And this is a conversation we need to have with our students. Victims feel like they don't have enough proof that the incident occurred. It's kind of like that he said, she said. So they're like, well, it's his word against mine. How am I going to prove this? Well, we're going to talk about that in a minute, how you can prove it. Two was they're afraid of retaliation. So, and I've heard, you hear a lot about that with the fraternity or quote unquote the team that will start slut shaming on social media. And so these victims are afraid of that type of retaliation. The third one was afraid of a hostile treatment from the authorities. That's incredibly sad. So they're afraid that if they go to their campus police, and by the way, side note, I always tell my students, go to the local police first before you go to campus police. But yeah, having the authorities question what you were wearing or how much did you have to drink, I could see would be a huge deterrent for any student. Here's another reason: they were uncertain whether the would authorities would consider it was even serious enough. Let's say it wasn't a full-blown rape penetration, but they were still being groped or fondled. That's sexual assault. And then the last one, and I thought this was really sad, was that they want their families to learn what had happened. They were embarrassed because the parents had to talk with them, and then it still happened, or they were afraid that their parents would pull them out of the college and that they would have to come home. So these are some of I think if parents, we can sit down and just let our daughters know, and our sons, because I'm a mother of sons, that what sexual assault is, and it all boils down to consent. And then kind of go, let's talk to them about what consent looks like. So I'm going to throw that back to you. And then I'll talk about some of the affirmative consent laws that we have in our country.
So, and I think that's a good place to jump into, because I personally feel, and I'm sure you do too, is you have every right as a woman to go wherever you want, whenever you want, dressed however you want. And yet, even as a male, I have to say, sometimes it's not smart to go to certain places at certain times and do stupid things with stupid people. So there is that realistic aspect of saying we should be able to do this, but we also need to be smart about how we're doing this. And I will say that that comes with experience. I talk with women all the time, and they say, you won't believe what I did when I was younger, and I had no idea. I had a few women tell me, thank God the men I was with were decent guys, because I did some really stupid things. And
Yep.
so older women get this experience. They get wiser because they've lived through some, what is the whole thing of, experiences, making stupid decisions and living through it. So it's a real conundrum, because you want people to live a full life. You don't want to be shuttered in like a little hermit and afraid of everything. However, we do have to accept that this thing happens, and we also need to give our children the permission to resist, the permission to say no, and then when we kick it back a little bit later, how do they actually do that? So from my standpoint, consent's a huge thing. It's the start of the use of force continuum at the bottom. Just the verbal aspect is a good start that you need to have involved, and that involves consent.
Right, right. And that's where we have to define it, because in California, there's about 6 states in the nation where we have an affirmative consent law. It's called the yes means yes law. And that means that if a victim, or let's say they're engaging in sexual activity, he or she has to hear the person say yes. Do you consent? Yes. Versus in the old days, it used to be no. And the reason that happened was because they found that in a court of law, maybe an attorney or a judge would ask the victim, did you say no? And she would say, I didn't say anything. I was too afraid. I froze. So that's why they're saying, okay, now we want it to be affirmative consent, that they have to hear yes. So it's not like that in every state, but consent across the board in all states is that if that person is incapacitated, unconscious, or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, it is non-consensual by law for a young person. This particular law was created for college campuses. I think it's a little different in the adult world, and that's a subject for a different time. But that's why as a mother of sons, I want to sit my sons down and tell them, you're not supposed to drink and drive, right? You need to wear a condom, but don't have sex with a drunk person. It just needs to be a part of your part of your own personal morals and rules, because the minute you do that, you're going to be the bad guy. It's not her, it's you. And so it's really important that we have these conversations with our daughters, what consent looks like, but also with our sons.
I was
Think
just
about
going to
it.
say yes with our sons too.
Right, right. I mean, a few minutes of fun could land them 25 years in jail, or they're registered as a sex offender. It's not worth it.
Well, I will also say too that parents need to realize that their sons are under peer pressure too.
Hmm. Right.
So they're in a situation where you do have an inebriated female in the fraternity house, and they're like, "Hey, buddy, here's your gift. Go to it, have fun."
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and you have an honorable son that upholds that and said, "This is not right. But what
Yeah.
am I going to do now? I have serious peer pressure, kind of driving me towards a behavior that I know is wrong."
Right. That happened at Vanderbilt. Because let's remember too, it's not always just like the acquaintance that might drug you at a party. This particular young woman was actually drugged by her boyfriend, and then he took her over to the dorm and had, I think it was 4 or 5 football players have sex with her, and they videotaped it. Well, there were a lot of guys there. They all ended up having to go to jail and register as sex offenders, got kicked out of the college and the football team. And they said in the aftermath, I never would have done that if it hadn't have been for the peer pressure and the alcohol. And let me tell you a quick story. One of my friends, her daughter went off to a particular college. I'm not sure if I should mention which college it's, but she was going to a study buddy group. So it was supposed to be just a group of people that just study buddies, right? So she gets there. There's 5 guys there, but her friends aren't there yet. So she's like, "Well, where are the girls?" And they said, "Oh yeah, yeah. They just text us. They'll be here. Come on in." So she trusted them, of course. It's a study buddy thing. They gave her a drink. I'm not sure if it was alcohol or not, but they had loaded it up with GHB, and we can talk about what kind of drugs later. Um, all 5 of them sexually assaulted her, took her back to her dorm, and she woke up, I don't know, 12, 14 hours later, realizing that, she had been used and probably passed around. And she didn't report it. They couldn't get her to go to a clinic. And I think that's another subject, another topic that we need to discuss on when we come to prevention. But she ended up suffering from PTSD, and a few months down the road, she had to leave college. They say that in 35% of college students that are sexually assaulted end up leaving college, and it's completely ruined her life. And guess what? Those 5 guys got away with it.
Yeah. We've got a million stories. This is an historic problem.
Yeah.
It's not going to go away. We can talk about all sorts of things, legislation. We can talk to our kids, but it's always been a historic problem that women face.
Yeah.
So let's move from the fact that, okay, we accept that it's a problem, we
Right.
understand the scope of it. What should we be doing now to try to protect our daughters?
Yeah, it's all about preparation and prevention. So the first thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't know how you feel about this, but they're all going to say, "Oh, mom, dad, I already heard this at my freshman orientation." No, you didn't. You know what you're going to hear at your freshman orientation? Oh, sometimes a lot of colleges make you take these online tests, sexual assault. They're kind of like a program that you have to go through, and you have to complete it. It's about a 2-hour course before you can even go to school. But a lot of it is don't drink, buddy system, be aware of your surroundings, and then they'll tell you about, calling your campus police and maybe different buttons they have around campus that you can push, in an emergency. But they don't really dive deep into the whole culture, and of what could possibly happen. I think and I could be wrong, it's not every college, but I think a lot of colleges gloss it over. So, um, preparing your kid for school, if I had a daughter, I would, and son, I would make them watch, the hunting grounds. That's, like I said, a good documentary. I would have this discussion about alcohol and date rape drugs and how they are the number one weapon. They're involved in about 90% of sexual assaults on campus. um, I would tell them, hey, listen, I know you're not supposed to drink until you're 21. I'm not stupid. I'm sure you're going to drink. So, you got to be responsible. There needs to be somebody in your group that's the designated driver. Well, one thing I love about sororities is they always have like a sober sister. The sober sister has to rotate. So every party there's somebody there looking out for the others. But there are college safety apps. One of my favorite college safety apps that I would really hope you'd have your kids download, it's called Circle of Six. And what happens is you have a group of 6 friends that you hit the app, and it alerts them that you need an excuse to, get out of this situation. So they can text you, they can call you, they could even find you and help you get out of this situation, especially if it's kind of, a party or a social event. Also, there's another app that I love. It's called Fake Me Out of Here, where you can actually create like a fake phone call on your phone. One of my students told me she made her phone ring. She showed the guy, and it had a picture of her dad. And she said, oh, hey, I need to get this. My dad's a Navy SEAL, and if I don't answer the phone call, he'll pin me. It's just a complete fake phone call. Another thing, how about bringing your own container to a party? Do we even have to talk about the red Solo cup? Bring your own container, something that I like the little flip tops, so, it would be more difficult for someone to put a liquid or powder form of these drugs in the drink. They even have these cup covers that you can put on drinks to cover your cup. But, always looking out, making sure that you're aware of where your drink is. Of course, not taking a drink from somebody. I mean, the list goes on and on. If we can just prep our kids with like a little check off list, and then finally, it's really talking to them about the importance of being, in a group, maybe even having a group password. So if I'm at a party and it's very uncomfortable for me to get out of this situation, I could send out an emoji to the whole group, and somebody could come and find me. So those are just some of the tips I always give my students. How about you?
Well, I like it's always easier to stay out of trouble than to get out of trouble.
Mhm.
So when we look at that, and I also think these conversations, and maybe you and I are different, but for being instructors and being in the business that we're in, oh, my kids grew up with all of this. They grew up with it, and my fellow associates, their kids grew up with it. And
Yeah.
they have one guy in particular, his daughter. If someone tries something with her, he's going to be in more trouble from her than she is from him.
Oh, she's
So
gonna go Chihuahua crazy.
there's the physical aspect, but I think if you're waiting until August to tell or July to tell your kids, here's what you should be doing, it's a little bit late. You should be preparing them all the way through life.
Yeah.
And you specialize in dealing with kids, and I know that's one of the things that's really, really important for people. And so when we have our classes, of course, we get tons of people that want to bring their kids in to teach them martial arts, right? So I think that's one of the things is accepting what's going on and trying to find the balance between being a healthy skeptic. So how can you be a skeptic? How can you also be able to Help yourself socially by, as you mentioned, those fake phone calls are great. There's to be adroit at navigating the social scene that you have to be in. You have to have kind of a high social EQ. But
Yeah.
how do you get in and around and not fall to peer pressure, but don't appear like you are a complete hermit and all those things? That is difficult. All these
I'm
things are difficult,
so glad you brought that up.
but
It's role play.
it is, and
Mhm.
it a lot. I love that. I love that when you say that. That's a great point. We can help our kids by role playing, and that's
Yep.
what we do in our classes, right? We role play with our bad guys,
Yep.
and then the best compliment you ever get from students is when something happens and they say it was just like class, and you
Right.
realize, okay, you're on the right track. So
Right.
being prepared emotionally and mentally, but also then we need to start preparing them physically. So that's a thing that I've always kind of had a problem with when people say, well, I'll just yell fire.
No.
Just don't go. Just those are all intellectual. Those are intellectual concepts. And you're like, no, you're not going to use your front brain. You're going to go to your lizard brain. And now you're being forced. You're a 110-pound female who's being forced by a college football player into a room. What are some of the things we can do? And how do we train our girls to defend themselves, unlike how we train our boys to defend themselves? So
Right.
you know where I'm kind of leading you into. I'm leading you into this concept of how we need to train our girls to fight differently than we train our boys to fight. Do you have any kind of feedback on that?
Yeah, for sure. After we finish the self-defense class and we go over all the different techniques, what I say at the very end is, okay, how many of you raise your hand could do these techniques if you were drunk? Not one person raises their hand. So once again, it's getting back to the importance of knowing that, drugs and alcohol will incapacitate you, going back to the buddy system, having somebody be the lookout. But if I needed to defend myself, maybe it's not a party, maybe I'm walking across campus. It's so important that we send our kids off to college. Well, self-defense should be a life skill, but if they
Right.
haven't had any training, a 3-hour self-defense class before they get to college could save their lives. I have to tell you one of the funniest stories I've heard. So I had this mom raise her hand and she said, "Hey, can I tell the girls a story about my mom making me take a self-defense class before college?" And we were like, "Yeah, yeah, please." She said, "Well, my mom made me take a class. I didn't want to take it. And then I went off to Pepperdine. And the first few months I was there, we got an alert that there was somebody on campus that was sexually assaulting women. So I decided to go to the library during the daytime when it was the most safe. And sure enough, I'm going back to my dorm, and three guys turned the corner and they said to her, "Hey, mama, you're going to come play with us." And she's like, "Oh, crap. It's not one, it's three." So, you know what she did? She used this technique that I call distract, destroy. She threw her backpack up to the chatty guy in the middle. He reaches up to catch it, and she nailed him with a groin kick. The other two guys split, right? The lead guy's on the ground rolling out crying. She said, "I literally picked my backpack up and I ran back to the library and reported it, and they caught these guys, and it turned out that they were not students.
Correct.
They were off-campus criminals."
That happens all the time. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we normally assume it's going to be another student. Can be, but a lot of times what we're seeing, and we're seeing this on corporate campuses as well.
Yeah.
There's no real barrier to entry. People can come in and come out, and colleges, to their credit, they want to be part of the community.
Right.
So yeah, there's very open, a lot
Right.
of community coming and going. So
Right.
what's interesting about that, that's an interesting story, but she had to practice that in some way. And that's what I'm getting at. We have a lot of
Yeah.
concepts and principles that we teach women in our classes. And one of those, like you said, is can you do it while you're drunk? And so you need to rely on gross body motions that
Mhm.
are not intricate and are very complicated. You need to have, we try to teach techniques that are natural in movement. You already do them naturally. We use our strongest weapons against his weakest targets. And
Right.
we also have to make sure that we are either trying to stay in one place and not be taken, or
Yeah.
we're trying to get away from a private place to a public place.
Yeah.
So those things are very interesting. It's hard to catch up a whole curriculum of physical self-defense, but I think it is a balance. I think we need to teach our people the preparedness part and then also the physical part.
Right. And can I just interject too? We teach if you can't get the strike in and run, because obviously running you want to do that first. We teach you and I both go to the ground, make yourself heavy. I teach my students have a self-defense temper tantrum and go chihuahua crazy. So I'll ask my girls this, or my students, if you're at if you're at a party, let's just say, it doesn't have to be college, where is it safer to be? In the backyard talking to somebody or the front yard? And you'd be surprised how many people say the front yard. And you and I both know that's the worst place to be, because I've heard of several situations where the guy took her out front and his friends were waiting and they loaded her up in the car and drove off. So think about just that simple skill of going to the ground and kicking to the knees, to the groin, to the face, the throat, but using your voice, which is your biggest weapon. Your legs are your strongest weapons, to attract attention from somebody that might be around or in the party. So, and that's a simple technique. I could have a temper tantrum if I were drunk, I think. Oh, I don't drink. Yeah, they can go to playitsafedefense.com. That's my website. I have my summer class schedule up. And if you're listening to this podcast during the year, I have regular classes on a regular basis for teen and women, and then for children.
Yeah, I would also like to suggest that you can't do a one and done. It's better than nothing, but a lot of times your first class you're a little bit overwhelmed,
Mhm.
and then your second class you start picking up on it. So sometime we'll talk about Wallflower Wendy that turned into Firecracker Wendy after her second class. So that
Oh,
helps to
perfect.
get some repetition. Thank you so much, Tracie. We hope everybody has a safe and successful transition into their first year of college. And if you need more information, you'll see our websites down below.